My Wife's Movie Club watched Tower. Tower is a 2016 animated recreation documentary of the 1966 Austin, Texas University of Texas shooting. The recreation is done with some real footage and some animated rotoscoping. The recreation follows a couple of survivors and shows their perspectives of the events. This documentary is just that, a documentation of things you may not have been aware of. It does not try to answer any questions or try to be comprehensive in any way for any specific point. It chooses a couple of stories and documents them in a cartoonish recreation style. This is probably one of the first mass shootings most of us remember. At the time, no one of these people on this campus, the campus University of Texas, or the adjacent area had anything to compare this to. It was all new. A surreal war zone on a college campus. Everyone ran for cover, and then several heroic acts occurred. The shooting lasted 96 minutes. 16 people died. When people and civilians made it up to the tower and killed the shooter, and then they ended the madness. Some of the surprising observations or aspects that I saw were, first, that the call goes out about the shooter and the police respond, but there is no command center, no officer in charge, no strategy or plan. The lack of communications and directions from law enforcement was just a surprise. They make radio announcements for everyone to stay away, but because of some miscommunications, some of the about the type of the rifle that's being used, they actually draw some people near to the scene. Eventually, the police do make it up to the tower, as mentioned, but it is 96 minutes before the shooter is taken out. The second observation was that the police are willing and appreciative of civilians with guns, sometimes even asking for volunteers and for, does anyone have any guns? Basically asking for help to take out the shooter. Calling, it kind of like reminds me of the Minutemen from colonial times where, you call on the civilians to take their weapons and fight the war. One great moment when Alan Crum, who's an assistant manager at the university co-op, he has a rifle in hand and they're entering the tower with a police officer, and he says something like, well, I guess you should deputize me. And the officer says, yeah, you're deputized. Then they show like the footage of him talking. He's like, really, based on that, I had kind of already assumed he was some sort of law enforcement already. The survivor stories give us a sense of courage, heroism, and brotherly love between mostly strangers. There is also a journalist who determines she learned she was a coward that day, trying to make her epiphany of her vice into a virtue of realization. But the rest of the witnesses in the documentary are not trained communicators to say things that get a reaction. They are genuine, human responses with regret, pain, and forgiveness all around. The film is terrifying because of the events that are happening. You can really imagine yourself being there, scared for your life. But it's also inspiring because of the heroic acts that are happening all over the campus. Another observation I thought was interesting was at the press conference that they show in the documentary. They show people talking, but they also show that they had a spokesman instead of taking the questions directly. And at one point, the spokesman reminds them, hey, I'll take the questions. That was interesting. The film also documents some of the questions that were asked, most of them related to what they did on the tower and if they tried to take the shooter alive. But in 1966, the shooter was not taken alive. He was not questioned. He was just stopped. And you can see some of the reactions from some of the people involved. Finally, near the end of the film, there is a news clip that is shown of Walter Cronkite, who reports that society is to blame for allowing this to happen. I'm not sure of the intentions of the filmmaker, but I must say that the word salad that Cronkite puts together is incoherent ramblings of a man who did not understand anything about this event. It was such a stark contrast between what was displayed and what he reported. We saw courage and love and people putting themselves in danger to help strangers, and then the media told us society is to blame? All these everyday heroes you just saw, or the others who felt helpless and wanted to do something, they are the ones who allowed for this culture of violence, etc. Basically, Cronkite's like, it's your fault. It was eye-opening to me because, I kind of thought there was a time when the news was honest and unbiased, And although that's not the intent of this film, to me, this film illustrates that the media has always been about sensationalism and controlling narratives. It wasn't enough to report what happened, the news, the facts. Nope. They had to editorialize it, make it about some narrative, some message. To me, it made me think of that Billy Madison quote, at the end where he says,
"Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it."
That's kind of what I thought of Cronkite's editorial at the end. The fascinating part of the film is it spends most or no time, or very little time, talking about the shooter. It is significant that the shooter is not the focus, because to this day, no one, at the time, meaning no one knows why he killed his girlfriend and mother and then started shooting random people. 16 people died, dozens others wounded. I think that the experts all agree that he was mentally deranged or disturbed, but no one knows to what extent or the reasons, or even if there were reasons. To me, there is a message to take away from this film, but it is not that everyone is bad or complicit in the violence and evil in society, like Cronkite said. It is the question that what are you going to do when bad things happen? Is your love of mankind such that you are going to, are willing to save them? Will you confront the threat, the danger? It is interesting to see the untrained and unprepared people put in a no-win situation, what they did, right? What's their true character? What comes out? If you have bought into the Cronkite, like, the media, you may have determined humanity is not worth saving. But if you watch this documentary, Tower, you may realize not everyone is a shooter. The rest just may be your neighbor or friend or a stranger worth saving. There are a couple questions that this documentary does not answer or even ask, and I kind of wish it would have. But the first one is, what did we learn? What did we change? The police response. Did we change anything as a result of these events? Also, no one talked to the survivors in a meaningful way to document the event at the time. There have been many short documentaries on this event. Most of them focus on the shooter and basically result that we don't know what happened. But no one talked to the survivors, and I wonder. That's kind of the point of this film, I believe, is the guy saying we didn't talk to these people, and we should have. They should have talked it out and dealt with their issues. And I wonder if that is if that would have made it worse or better. I'm not sure. What is the better strategy? To talk out your trauma, to your stresses, to recreate, to reenact, or is it just better to move on, to get past them, to get over them? There's probably a case that both strategies result in the same thing, which is getting over them, but it seemed like most of the people dealt with it very well. Anyway, I like this film, and I hope you did too.
God's forgiven me everything I've done, and He's kept me from being that kind of person, that decided to go that way. How could I not forgive him? He was just a really mixed up kid.